grey dawn clung to the Tower of London as Francis Dereham stood at the edge of the scaffold. The world he once knew, now reduced to a blur of anxious faces, and the echoing hush that only judgment can summon. Only months before he had walked the corridors of power with the ease of a man favoured by fortune, hopeful beneath the gaze of Catherine Howard. Now that hope curdled to dread as he faced the assembled crowd, a throng hungering not for mercy, but for the spectacle of a royal reckoning. The wood beneath his feet felt cold and final, the gallows looming not just as an instrument of punishment, but as a stage for the ruin of a life once intertwined with the Queen's. The shadow that had fallen over Dereham began years earlier in the guarded chambers of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. He was young, his future unwritten, when he and Catherine kindled a secret affection amid the restless intrigue of noble households. Before Catherine ever wore a crown, before Henry's gaze turned her into a pawn of dynastic ambition, Dereham had won her heart. Their union whispered about in corridors lined with portraits of ancestors, watching unblinking as fate closed in. His was not a tale of brazen courtship, but of youthful longing, of stolen glances, forbidden confidences, and the fragile hope of a future that could never survive the ambitions of the Tudor court. Yet time is ruthless, and in the palace of kings the past is never truly past. The rumors that once seemed harmless now twisted into weapons. As Catherine became queen, those memories of Dereham, of clandestine promises, of a world before the king were dredged up and offered to the throne as evidence of betrayal. With every accusation, the noose tightened. The court murmured of treason, of a queen's honor tarnished, and Henry's wrath was stirred into icy resolve. For Dereham, the machinery of royal retribution moved with chilling certainty. The trial, little more than ritual, cast him from hope to doom, his every plea lost beneath the stern recitation of the king's law. The execution itself unfolded beneath a sky heavy with expectation. The crowd pressed close eyes glittering with anticipation and secret dread. They watched as the ritual of royal justice played out a life taken not simply for its own transgressions, but as a symbol, a warning, a declaration of the consequences for those who dared trespass against the will of power. Dereham's fear was palpable, yet pride and sorrow mingled in his gaze. He knew his fate was no longer his own. Each moment stretched thin as the ritual proceeded, each breath echoing with the knowledge that his story would end not in obscurity, but in the silent judgment of all who bore witness. When the scaffold emptied, a chill remained, an unspoken lesson, inscribed in the silence that followed. Francis Dereham's name would echo through the tower's shadowed halls, long after the crowd dispersed, a haunting reminder that in the world of kings love can become treason, and the machinery of power can devour even the most private of histories. In his fall, England was reminded of the cost of betrayal, real or imagined, and of the cold calculus by which royal authority defends itself. The echoes of that day would linger heavy as the London mist, long after the sun set over the grim stones of the tower. In the damp grey light of morning, Francis Dereham stood beneath the shadow of the scaffold, his face pale against the sullen throng that pressed in for a glimpse of royal retribution. Once he had nursed secret hopes and ambitions, weaving himself into the life of Catherine Howard, drawn close by passion and reckless trust. But now, beneath the cold gaze of the law and the restless hunger of the crowd, he stood condemned, his fate sealed by the machinery of power, the whispers of scandal, and the inexorable need of a king to silence all reminders of betrayal. The story that led him here was woven through with the forbidden and the dangerous. Dereham's intimacy with Catherine had blossomed in the secret hours of youth, when the boundaries of consequence were blurred by longing and the thrill of stolen encounters. Yet every secret leaves footprints, and in the labyrinth of the Howard household, vigilance took the shape of enemies disguised as kin. It was a warning delivered in the hushed tones of a letter and the unwelcome intrusion of authority that tore their secret into the open. Agnes Howard's discovery of Francis in Catherine's chamber shattered not just their trust, but the fragile web that held their futures together. With a single decision, Dereham was cast out, his name now a curse upon Catherine's reputation, his departure from England marked by rumors of disgrace and hints of lawlessness. While Dereham drifted across the sea, his hopes trailing behind him like ghosts, Catherine's star rose with dangerous speed. She entered the shimmering, treacherous world of court, a place where ambition and beauty courted disaster in equal measure. There, in the service of Queen Anne of Cleves, Catherine learned to navigate the currents of favor and secrecy. When Francis returned, summoned or bribed into silence, it was not for love, but for the security of a reputation now vital to royal ambition. He was installed as a secretary at Hampton Court, a position more prison than privilege. His knowledge of Catherine's past transformed into a liability to be managed and contained. But in the fevered atmosphere of Henry VIII's court, secrets never stayed buried for long. The king's eye, drawn to the fresh youth and easy laughter of Catherine Howard, saw only what he wished to possess, blind to the tangled loyalties and shadows trailing behind her. The difference in years was a chasm, Henry now ailing, tempestuous, and swollen with age, and Catherine, barely more than a girl, thrust suddenly into the freezing light of queenship. Francis, ever more a relic of a life now forbidden, became a symbol not just of lost innocence, but of a threat to the fragile illusion of purity on which Catherine's place now depended. As the scaffold loomed and the crowd gathered, Dereham's fear mingled with shame and a bitter sense of inevitability. He was not simply an offender, he was a lesson. The ceremony of his punishment played out for all to witness, a warning to those who would trespass against royal authority or disturb the delicate balance of the court's reputation. Every step from accusation to judgment unfolded with the cold precision of ritual, the crowd's anticipation a living force pressing in from every side. And in the silence that followed, as the echoes of justice faded across the square, the fate of Francis Dereham remained heavy and unresolved, a shadow that would haunt the court long after the king's wrath had cooled, and a reminder of the terrible price of passion and betrayal in the orbit of a crown. On a bleak morning, beneath the unmoving gaze of 1,000 strangers, Francis Dereham stood alone before the gallows, his breath shallow, his future extinguished beneath a sky the color of old iron. Where once he had navigated the gilded corridors of the court with ambition and hope, now he was nothing but a solitary figure ensnared in the relentless ritual of royal justice. The scaffold loomed as both spectacle and warning, its timbers creaking above the assembled crowd whose anticipation vibrated in the cold air, a kingdom summoned to witness the reckoning of a queen's former lover. Long before this day, Dereham's fate had been set in motion in the shadowed halls of Pontefract Castle, where he had approached Queen Catherine Howard, perhaps emboldened by old affection, perhaps driven by desperation. Their past, once secret and intimate, now became a chain binding them both. Some whispered that he had pressed her, blackmailing the young queen into making him her private secretary and later a gentleman usher of her chamber. Others believed that Dereham's dreams were more dangerous still, for he had boasted that should King Henry die, he would claim Catherine as his bride, grasping for the promise of power and privilege that now flickered just out of reach. Yet in the labyrinth of the Tudor court, such ambitions were fuel for suspicion and betrayal, and Dereham, by his own hand or the machinations of others, had drawn the eyes of jealous rivals and vengeful monarch alike. As rumors thickened tales of Catherine's clandestine meetings with Thomas Culpepper, her supposed infidelity, and Dereham's boasts, the machinery of accusation ground inexorably onward. Dereham, known for his volatility and reckless tongue, became entangled in a web spun by enemies and fate. At court, his outbursts and drunken quarrels had made him few friends, and his rivalry with Culpepper only stoked the fire that now consumed him. The rumors reached the ever-watchful Archbishop Cranmer, whose investigation swept up not just Dereham, but Catherine Culpepper, Lady Rochford, and much of Catherine's own family. Every whisper became a nail in the coffin of reputation, every secret a stone in the pocket of the condemned. Under the suffocating weight of interrogation, Dereham's past with Catherine came to light. They admitted to a relationship that, in the eyes of Tudor law, hovered perilously close to marriage, a pre-contract, a bond as binding as any royal ceremony. If true, Catherine's marriage to the king was invalid, and the crown itself stood threatened by scandal. Amid this chaos, old letters vanished, burned perhaps, by those desperate to shield the queen or thrown into the fire to protect the dynasty's fragile veneer. Yet even as evidence was erased, testimony remained. Dereham confessed, and Catherine, under the cold scrutiny of the court, claimed that she had been forced into the affair, a claim many doubted, recalling the bright days when she and Dereham had walked together arm in arm, radiant with youth and joy. In the end, it mattered little what had been true or false. In the eyes of the crown, Dereham's very existence was now an offense against order, a living reminder that beneath the pageantry of power lay the peril of private desire. The gallows waited, and the crowd's restless silence pressed against Dereham as tightly as any rope. Here, amid the smoke of torches and the echo of prayers, the ceremony of royal justice unfolded, pitiless and absolute. No plea could halt the inevitable. No memory of love or laughter could soften the cold hand of retribution. And when the last word was spoken and the sentence carried out, a hush fell across the throng, a silence both oppressive and profound. The lesson was clear in the kingdom of Henry VIII. The cost of betrayal was annihilation, and the shadows cast by the scaffold would linger long after the crowd had vanished, a chilling warning echoing through the haunted corridors of England's court. On a bleak December morning beneath the unforgiving English sky, Francis Dereham was brought from the cold depths of the Tower of London, his world shrunken from privilege to the grim reality of a traitor's fate. Once he had moved through the corridors of power as Catherine Howard's favored companion, basking in the fleeting warmth of royal affection and the hope of advancement. Now, stripped of status, he was paraded through the streets atop a wooden hurdle, his body jostled and exposed before a crowd hungry for the spectacle of royal retribution. The gallows at Tyburn rose before him, a monument to judgment and humiliation, its shadow stretching long and chill across the assembled masses. The charges that had sealed Dereham's doom were read with ritual solemnity: treason, betrayal, and the reckless intimacy he once shared with a queen who no longer possessed a crown. The trial at Guildhall had been swift, the evidence shaped by whispers and suspicion, the sentence delivered without mercy. Both Dereham and Thomas Culpepper, another of Catherine's alleged lovers, pleaded for the dignity of a quick death, but only Culpepper's petition was granted. In this, royal vengeance revealed its true face. Punishment was not simply justice, but a warning, a public shaming designed to echo through the halls of power. As Dereham was led to the scaffold, the crowd's anticipation grew electric, the air heavy with both dread and curiosity. He stood before the noose, the executioner waiting with cold patience. Every movement became part of a grim ceremony, the hush before the sentence, the trembling of hands, the slow, inevitable approach to the final moment. The faces around him blurred into a single, unblinking gaze, each onlooker a silent witness to the destruction of a life for the preservation of royal authority. Through it all, Dereham's terror and disbelief hung in the air, more potent than any cry or plea for mercy. Culpepper's end, delivered by the axe, was swift and nearly merciful by comparison. Dereham's, in contrast, unfolded as a performance of punishment, his agony lingering not only in flesh, but in the memory of all who watched. When at last the execution was finished, silence descended thick and absolute, save for the distant echo of church bells and the soft shuffling of the crowd as they dispersed, chastened and contemplative. In the aftermath, Dereham's head, like Culpepper's, was mounted on London Bridge, a grim reminder to all who passed of the peril that lurked behind the velvet curtains of power. For Catherine Howard, still imprisoned and awaiting her own fate, the sight of that pale, silent face may have been her final lesson that in a world ruled by suspicion and ambition, Love itself could become a sentence and loyalty a noose. Dereham's death did not simply punish one man, it cast a long, chilling shadow over the court, serving as an enduring warning of the brutal calculus at the heart of royal justice.